The wrench slipped from the mounting bracket and clanged against the concrete floor of Hangar 7. Hazel did not flinch. She had heard that sound 1,000 times before, in places far less forgiving than this Texas airbase. Her fingers continued their methodical work beneath the belly of the UH-60 Blackhawk, tracing the hydraulic lines with the patience of someone who understood that machines, unlike people, never lied about their problems. Fort Braxton shimmered under the August sun, heat waves rising from the tarmac like ghosts of departed aircraft. Inside the hangar, industrial fans pushed the thick air around without cooling it, and the smell of aviation fuel mixed with sweat and metal created an atmosphere that clung to skin and clothes alike. 23 personnel worked in various states of concentration across the massive space, their voices echoing off corrugated walls that had sheltered military aircraft for over 4 decades. She heard the boots before she saw them, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that announced themselves because they expected the world to get out of their way. The kick came without warning, a steel-toed boot connected with her ankle, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to send a message. Hazel slid out from beneath the helicopter on the wheeled creeper, oil smeared across her cheek, her hair escaping from a ponytail that had given up pretending to be neat somewhere around 0600 hours that morning. Derek Lawson stood over her, arms crossed, his technician supervisor badge catching the fluorescent light. 15 years of service had carved permanent lines of authority into his face, and he wielded that experience like a weapon against anyone who threatened his territory. "Hey, sewer rat, out, now." Hazel blinked up at him, saying nothing. Her coveralls hung loose on her small frame, stained with the evidence of a morning spent doing work no one had asked her to do. "VIP delegation lands in 4 hours. Derek jerked his thumb toward the hangar's far corner. "You think I'm letting some grease monkey embarrass this unit? Get your tools and disappear." Around them, conversations faltered. Wrenches stopped turning. At least 15 faces turned toward the confrontation, though none moved to intervene. In the unwritten hierarchy of Hangar 7, Derek's word carried weight, and the temporary contractor with no documented military background carried none at all. Hazel rose to her feet slowly. At 5'4", she barely reached Derek's shoulder. Her hands, small and scarred in ways that did not match her official personnel file, hung loosely at her sides. "I was checking the hydraulic pressure variance on Bird 3. Her voice came out quiet, unremarkable. The reading seemed off. "Did I ask you to check anything?" Derek stepped closer, using his height to crowd her space. "Your job is to hand tools to people who actually know how to use them. Your job is to stay out of sight when important people show up. Your job is to be invisible." He enunciated each word like he was explaining gravity to a child. "Can you handle being invisible? Or is that too complicated for you?" From across the hangar, Amber Pierce approached with the careful precision of someone who had practiced walking in heels on metal grating. The public affairs officer's uniform looked freshly pressed despite the heat, not a single blonde hair out of place. She surveyed Hazel the way one might examine a stain on expensive furniture. "Derek's right." Amber's smile did not reach her eyes. "Colonel James's unit doesn't need to see this." She gestured vaguely at Hazel's entire existence. "Put her somewhere. Storage room, supply closet. I don't care where, as long as she's not visible when the cameras start rolling." Hazel bent to pick up her tool bag. The motion caused her sleeve to ride up slightly, revealing the edge of a scar that traced from her wrist and disappeared beneath worn fabric. Neither Derek nor Amber noticed. They had already dismissed her, turning their attention to matters they considered worthy of their time. But across the hangar, near the parts requisition desk, Master Sergeant Francis Williams noticed everything. At 62, with 40 years of service behind him and a face that had seen 3 wars worth of things he would never discuss, Francis had learned that the most dangerous people in any room were usually the ones nobody was watching. He watched Hazel move toward the corner, her gait unremarkable to untrained eyes. But Francis had trained eyes. He had survived Grenada, Desert Storm, and 2 tours in places that did not exist on official maps. And something about the way this woman moved, the way she positioned herself with her back to solid walls, the way her eyes tracked every entrance and exit without appearing to look at anything at all, triggered instincts he had not needed in 20 years. "That girl," he muttered to himself, wiping grease from a turbine blade. "That girl ain't what she's pretending to be." Hazel found a spot near the maintenance supply shelves, far from the main work areas. She sat on an overturned crate and pulled a battered notebook from her bag, appearing to study something mundane. But her attention remained fixed on the hangar's central workspace, cataloging faces, noting hierarchies, filing away details that might matter later. She had been at Fort Braxton for 19 days. 19 days of deliberate invisibility, 19 days of absorbing insults with the patience of someone playing a game whose rules only she understood. The notebook in her hands contained no technical specifications. Its pages held names, dates, and a single photograph, creased from being folded too many times. In the photograph, two women in flight suits stood before a Blackhawk helicopter, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincibility of youth. One of them was Hazel, 3 years younger. The other was a woman who officially no longer existed. Hazel closed the notebook as footsteps approached. Mason Webb, the unit's avionics specialist, stopped in front of her with the swagger of someone who believed technical expertise entitled him to treat others as intellectual inferiors. His reputation for solving impossible electrical problems was matched only by his reputation for making everyone around him feel stupid for not solving them first. "Hey, temp girl," he snapped his fingers twice, the gesture more suited to summoning a dog than addressing a human being. "Need someone to hold a flashlight while I work on Bird 2's navigation array. Think you can manage that without screwing it up?" Hazel stood without comment and followed him across the hangar. The navigation array access panel required Mason to contort himself into an uncomfortable position inside the helicopter's cockpit. Hazel positioned herself nearby, flashlight steady, watching his hands work, with the detached interest of someone grading an examination she had already passed. "See this?" Mason pointed to a circuit board dense with components. TAN 115 multi-mode receiver. Most complicated piece of equipment on this bird. Probably looks like Christmas lights to you. Hazel said nothing. The integration protocols alone take 6 months to master. Mason continued, enjoying the sound of his own expertise. Every frequency band, every encryption handshake, every failover sequence. You couldn't even pronounce half the terminology. He reached for a connector, then paused, frowning at a diagnostic readout. Numbers flickered across the screen in patterns that clearly did not match his expectations. "That's weird." Mason leaned closer. "The signal processing module is throwing phantom errors. Never seen this before." Hazel tilted the flashlight slightly, illuminating a small section of wiring that ran behind the main circuit board. Her movement appeared accidental, but the beam landed precisely on a connection point where two wires crossed at an angle that should not have existed. Mason did not notice the guidance. He was too busy pressing buttons and muttering about software glitches. "Probably need to run a full diagnostic reset." He reached for his tablet. "That'll take at least 2 hours. Colonel James is going to love hearing his birds aren't ready." Hazel shifted her weight, and the flashlight beam moved again, this time catching the same wire junction from a different angle. The crossed wires gleamed distinctly now, their incorrect routing obvious to anyone who bothered to look. Mason still did not see it. His attention remained fixed on his tablet, scrolling through diagnostic menus with increasing frustration. "This is nonsense," he muttered. "The system passed its last certification 6 weeks ago. There's no reason for these errors." 3 feet away, Chief Warrant Officer Ivy Chen observed the scene from behind a clipboard she was pretending to study. Ivy had spent 12 years as a helicopter maintenance officer, and she knew navigation systems well enough to write textbooks about them. She had also noticed something Derek and Amber had missed, something that made her postpone her lunch break to keep watching the temporary contractor who was supposed to be invisible. The way Hazel held that flashlight was wrong. Not wrong as in incompetent, wrong as in too precise. The beam found exactly what it needed to find, moved exactly when it needed to move, illuminated exactly the information required. That was not how civilians held flashlights. That was not how temporary contractors who were supposed to know nothing about avionics systems held flashlights. That was how instructors held flashlights when they were testing students. Ivy made a note on her clipboard and continued watching. The afternoon sun climbed higher and the hangar temperature rose with it. Fans whirred ineffectively against heat that seemed to have physical weight, pressing down on everyone inside like a giant hand demanding they work faster while giving them less energy to do so. Hazel had retreated to her corner after Mason dismissed her with a wave and a grunt that might have been thank you in some alternate universe where manners existed. She sat on her overturned crate, apparently doing nothing, actually cataloging everything. Bird 1, fully operational, cleared for V1P transport. Bird 2, navigation issues unresolved. Mason still chasing software ghosts instead of looking at the hardware right in front of his face. Bird 3, the one she had been examining that morning, with hydraulic readings that whispered of problems nobody else seemed interested in hearing. Bird 4, currently airborne with Colonel James's advance team, scheduled to return within the hour. She noted the relationships too. Derek commanded through intimidation, respected by some, feared by others, liked by none. Amber maintained control through social positioning, always knowing whose opinion mattered and whose could be safely ignored. Mason protected his ego with technical gatekeeping, making others feel small to make himself feel large. Sergeant Silas enforced regulations with the rigidity of someone who confused rules with righteousness. Lieutenant Floyd, the newest addition to her list of obstacles, had a nervous energy that suggested he was hiding something, though what that something might be remained unclear. These were the people who believed they understood power. Hazel understood power differently. She understood that real power often looked like nothing at all. It moved quietly, asked no permission, announced itself only when the moment demanded revelation. Real power could afford to be patient. Real power could absorb insults like water absorbing stones, using each one to grow deeper, stronger, more certain of its eventual release. The hangar doors opened with a mechanical groan, admitting a wave of Texas heat and a figure that made Hazel's expression flicker for the first time that day. Airman First Class, Theo Martinez was 22 years old and possessed the kind of earnest enthusiasm that military service had not yet managed to crush. He pushed a cart loaded with supply boxes, his uniform showing signs of the heat, despite his obvious efforts to maintain appearance standards. "Hey," he stopped near Hazel's corner, glancing around to make sure no one important was watching. "You're the temp, right? The one Derek keeps yelling at?" Hazel nodded once. "I'm Theo." He extended a hand, then noticed his palm was sweaty and wiped it on his pants before offering it again. "Sorry about, the way they treat you. Not everyone here is like that." Hazel shook his hand. Her grip was brief but firm, the pressure exactly calibrated, neither aggressive nor submissive. Theo noticed without understanding why he noticed. "It's fine." Her voice carried no resentment. "I'm used to being underestimated." "Still not right, though." Theo shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more, but unsure how much sympathy a temporary contractor would welcome. "I've only been here 3 months, but I've seen how Derek operates. He's got this thing about proving he's the smartest person in any room. Makes him miss a lot." "What does he miss?" The question caught Theo off guard. He had expected gratitude maybe, or dismissal, not genuine curiosity delivered in a tone that suggested the answer actually mattered. "People, mostly." Theo leaned against his supply cart. "He's so busy showing off what he knows that he doesn't notice what other people know. Like last month, we had this issue with the auxiliary power units. Derek spent 3 days trying to fix it himself. Wouldn't let anyone help. Kept insisting the problem was in the fuel system. Turned out to be a simple wiring fault that any first-year tech could have spotted. But no first-year tech pointed it out. Would you, if you knew he'd make your life miserable for proving him wrong?" Hazel almost smiled. Almost. "I suppose not." Anyway, Theo straightened, remembering he had duties that did not include fraternizing with invisible personnel. "If you need anything, let me know. I'm usually around the supply depot. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling all this really well. Most people would have quit by now." He wheeled his cart away, leaving Hazel to contemplate the unexpected kindness of strangers in places that did not encourage kindness. The moment dissolved when Sergeant Silas appeared, his presence preceded by a bark that might have been a laugh if it contained any actual humor. "Well, well, the temp found a friend." Silas stopped with his hands on his hips, the classic posture of a man who expected the world to arrange itself according to his preferences. "Martinez, you've got 30 seconds to explain why you're chatting up civilian contractors instead of restocking the ready room." Theo snapped to attention. "Just delivering supplies, Sergeant. Looks like you were delivering more than supplies." Silas turned his attention to Hazel, his eyes performing the kind of dismissive assessment that some men considered observation. "You, what's your name again? Helen? Hannah? Hazel." "Right, Hazel." He pronounced it like an accusation. "I've been watching you, Hazel. Noticed you seem real interested in things that aren't your business. Wandering around, looking at equipment, asking questions you shouldn't be asking." "I haven't asked any questions." "Don't get smart with me." Silas stepped closer, using height and position to establish dominance. Women like you think you can just show up and play soldier. Think a few weeks pushing papers qualifies you to work alongside people who've actually served. Let me be clear about something. His voice dropped to a growl. This is a military facility. We have standards. We have hierarchies. And you are at the bottom of both. Understood? Hazel met his eyes. The moment stretched like a wire pulled too tight, carrying tension that neither of them acknowledged openly. Understood, Sergeant. Good. Silas nodded once, satisfied with what he interpreted as submission. Now, make yourself useful. There's a pallet of oil drums near Gate 3 that needs moving to Storage Room C. Shouldn't be too hard for someone who thinks she belongs here. He walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. Theo caught Hazel's eye from across the hangar, his expression apologetic. She gave him a slight nod, nothing that could be interpreted as complaining, then headed toward Gate 3. The pallet held 12 50-gallon drums, each weighing approximately 400 pounds when full. These were clearly full. Moving them individually would require equipment. Moving them as a group would require a forklift. Moving them by hand would require someone to demonstrate exactly how strong temporary contractors were not supposed to be. Hazel studied the drums for a moment, calculating angles and leverage points that existed in her mind as clearly as blueprints on paper. Then she grabbed the pallet jack from its mount on the wall, positioned it beneath the load with the precision of someone who had moved far heavier things in far more dangerous circumstances, and began wheeling the entire pallet towards Storage Room C. Ivy watched from a distance, making another note on her clipboard. The pallet jack's wheels squeaked rhythmically against the concrete floor as Hazel navigated through the hangar's organized chaos. She kept her head down, her pace steady, her expression blank. The invisibility that Derek demanded, she delivered, but on her own terms. She was halfway to Storage Room C when the dropped socket wrench nearly took out her eye. The tool fell from a maintenance platform 15 feet above, tumbling end over end toward her skull. Any normal person would have frozen, would have flinched, would have done something that acknowledged the basic human fear of objects falling toward vulnerable body parts. Hazel's left hand shot up and caught the wrench without breaking stride. The motion was so fast, so automatic, that she had already placed the tool on her pallet and continued walking before her brain registered what her body had done. But several brains in the hangar registered it clearly, including one belonging to Tech Sergeant Caleb Morrison, who had dropped the wrench in the first place. Holy cow. Caleb leaned over the platform railing, staring down at the woman who should have needed medical attention and instead seemed completely unbothered. Hey, you okay down there? Hazel glanced up. Fine. That was some catch. Caleb's brow furrowed. Sorry about the drop. Slipped right out of my hand. Happens. She resumed pushing the pallet, offering nothing more. Caleb watched her go, then descended the platform ladder and sought out the one person he trusted to explain things that did not make sense. He found Francis near the coffee station, stirring powdered creamer into a cup of liquid that only technically qualified as coffee. Pop. Caleb lowered his voice. You see the temp girl catch that wrench? Francis sipped his coffee and grimaced. Saw it. She didn't even look. Her hand just moved, like she knew it was coming before it fell. Some people got good reflexes. That wasn't good reflexes. That was... Caleb struggled for the right word. Trained. That was muscle memory from something specific. I've seen guys with combat experience move like that. Quick and sure, no wasted motion. He glanced toward the storage room where Hazel had disappeared. What do we actually know about her? Francis drained his coffee and crushed the paper cup. What I know is that questions like that tend to have answers people aren't ready to hear. What I also know is that whoever she is, she ain't our enemy. If she was, we'd already be in trouble. How can you be sure? Because... Francis dropped his cup in the recycling bin. Enemies don't spend 3 weeks pretending to be incompetent. Enemies strike fast. Whatever game she's playing, it's not aimed at us. He walked away before Caleb could ask the obvious follow-up question, the one that had been forming in Caleb's mind and now hung in the air unanswered. If the game was not aimed at them, then who was it aimed at? The afternoon wore on, and the hangar's tension ratcheted higher with each passing hour. Colonel James's unit was now expected in less than 2 hours, and the problems that should have been solved kept multiplying instead. Mason's navigation issues had spread to a second aircraft. Lieutenant Floyd had somehow misplaced 3 pages of maintenance documentation, causing a cascade of paperwork chaos that threatened to delay certification. Sergeant Silas stalked the hangar like an angry bear, snapping at anyone who'd crossed his path. Derek oscillated between micromanaging his team and berating them for needing management. Only Amber maintained her composure, though her calm came from confidence that someone else would solve every problem before it affected her carefully planned VIP reception. Hazel observed it all from her corner, forgotten by most, noticed by few. She had completed the oil drum relocation, then been assigned to inventory duty in the parts room, a task designed to keep her occupied and out of sight. The parts room suited her purposes well. Its shelves held a systematic history of every aircraft the unit had serviced, and its filing cabinets contained documentation that most temporary contractors would never think to examine. She was not most temporary contractors. Her fingers moved through folders with practiced efficiency, scanning headers, checking dates, building a picture from fragments that individually meant nothing but collectively pointed towards something specific. A requisition form from 3 years ago, a maintenance log from the same period, a personnel transfer request that had been approved with unusual speed. The pieces were here. She just needed more time to assemble them. The parts room door opened without warning, admitting a shaft of light and the silhouette of someone who had not expected to find the room occupied. Lieutenant Floyd stopped short, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. "What are you doing in here?" Hazel held up a clipboard. "Inventory count. Sergeant Silas assigned me." In the classified section, she glanced at the shelf beside her, which did indeed bear a small red tag indicating restricted access. The glance was perfectly innocent, the slight widening of her eyes exactly what someone would expect from a contractor who had wandered somewhere she should not be. "I'm sorry. I didn't notice the marking." She stepped away from the shelf. "The light isn't very good back here." Floyd's jaw tightened. He moved into the room, his body blocking the only exit, his expression shifting through calculations he did not realize were visible on his face. "Give me the clipboard." Hazel handed it over. Floyd examined the inventory list, found nothing incriminating, because there was nothing incriminating to find, and handed it back with a grunt. "Stay in the main area from now on. Restricted sections require authorization you don't have." "Of course, Lieutenant." He held her gaze for a moment, searching for something, finding nothing that confirmed his suspicions. Then he left, pulling the door closed with more force than necessary. Hazel waited 30 seconds before allowing her expression to change. Floyd was nervous. Floyd was watching her specifically, not with the general contempt that Derek showed, but with the targeted attention of someone who feared discovery. That nervousness told her more than any classified document could have. She had found her first real thread. Now she needed to pull it without alerting anyone to what she was unraveling. The final hour before the VIP arrival transformed the hangar into controlled chaos. Every surface gleamed. Every tool hung in its designated spot. Every person scrambled to ensure their piece of the operation met the impossible standards that visits from special operations units demanded. Hazel had been assigned to hold a polishing cloth, officially tasked with ensuring the main hangar floor remained free of scuff marks. In practice, this meant she stood near the center of the action, invisible in plain sight, watching everything while appearing to contribute nothing. Bird 2's navigation problems remained unsolved. Mason had given up on software fixes and was now arguing with Derek about whether to simply declare the aircraft non-operational until a full diagnostic could be completed after the VIP visit. Their debate grew loud enough to attract unwanted attention. "This is unacceptable." Colonel Bradley, Fort Braxton's base commander, had arrived to inspect preparations and found them lacking. His uniform bore the insignia of someone who had achieved rank through political navigation rather than combat excellence, and his concern focused less on mission readiness than on how the base would appear to visitors with influence. "Colonel James expects 4 fully operational aircraft. You're telling me we can only deliver 3? The navigation system is throwing errors we can't explain, sir." Derek's voice carried the strain of someone defending a position he knew was indefensible. "It's not a simple fix." "Then make it a simple fix. Figure it out. You have 45 minutes. Bradley walked away, leaving Derek and Mason to resume their argument with increased urgency and decreased productivity. Hazel continued polishing a floor that did not need polishing, her attention split between the navigation debate and the corners of the hangar where Francis had positioned himself with a clear sight line to both exit and entry points. The old master sergeant caught her eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Not everything, but enough to recognize a fellow professional operating in hostile territory. The question was whether his knowledge made him an ally or a complication. A commotion near Bird 3 interrupted her analysis. Specialist Fern, a young mechanic who had been running final checks on the helicopter's external components, stepped back from the aircraft with an expression of confusion. "This isn't right." She held a hydraulic line coupling in her hands, examining it with growing concern. "This fitting was installed backward. The fluid can't flow properly." Derek appeared instantly, snatching the coupling from her hands. "Let me see that." He examined the part, his face cycling through denial, anger, and the particular shade of red that accompanied public embarrassment. "Who worked on this bird this morning? Who touched this system?" Silence answered him. Then someone pointed toward the corner where Hazel stood with her polishing cloth. "The temp was under there this morning, before you kicked her out." Derek's head swung toward Hazel like a weapon acquiring a target. "You, come here, now." She approached with the measured pace of someone who had nothing to fear and nothing to prove. The gathered crowd parted to let her through, their faces displaying various combinations of curiosity and anticipation. "Did you touch the hydraulic system?" Derek held up the coupling like evidence in a trial. "Did you remove this fitting?" Hazel looked at the part, then at Derek, then at the part again. "I noticed a pressure variance this morning. I was attempting to identify the source when you told me to leave. So you admit you touched it." "I admit I was inspecting it. The fitting was already installed incorrectly when I found it. I was about to report the issue when you decided my presence was inappropriate." The accusation hung in the air, redirecting blame with surgical precision. Derek's face darkened, but before he could respond, Ivy stepped forward. "I can verify that." The chief warrant officer's voice carried the authority of someone who had been quietly documenting events all through. "I observed the temp examining the hydraulic system this morning. She appeared to be conducting a visual inspection, nothing more. And if you check the maintenance log, you'll find that Bird 3's hydraulic coupling was replaced 2 days ago by a technician who is currently on leave." Derek's jaw worked silently. The coupling in his hand suddenly felt less like evidence and more like a trap. Then why was it installed wrong? That's an excellent question. Ivy retrieved the coupling and examined it herself. One that might be worth investigating after the VIP visit, when we have time to review procedures rather than assign blame to convenient targets. The implicit criticism landed exactly where Ivy had aimed it. Derek's authority, so recently deployed against Hazel, now looked less like leadership and more like scapegoating. "Fine." He thrust the coupling at Mason. "Fix it. 20 minutes. I don't care how." Mason took the part with a grimace and disappeared toward Bird 3, already calculating how many shortcuts he would need to take to meet an impossible deadline. The crowd dispersed. Hazel returned to her corner with her polishing cloth. But something had shifted in the hangar's atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. A few people glanced her way with expressions that contained less contempt and more curiosity. The invisible woman had just demonstrated that invisibility could be a choice rather than a condition. And several people were now wondering what else she might be choosing to hide. The radio crackled at 14:32 hours, carrying a voice that changed everything. "Fort Braxton Control, this is Nighthawk Actual. 4 birds inbound. ETA, 7 minutes. Requesting clearance for pattern approach to Hangar 7. The message rippled through the facility like electricity through water. Colonel James was arriving early. Derek began shouting orders. Amber smoothed her uniform and activated her professional smile. Sergeant Silas bellowed for everyone to take their positions. Colonel Bradley materialized from wherever base commanders waited when they wanted to appear at dramatic moments. Hazel stepped back, pressing herself against the supply shelves, becoming as small and unnoticeable as possible. Her role in the next few minutes was to not exist, to be the empty space that VIP visitors never noticed and never remembered. But her eyes tracked the incoming aircraft through the hangar's open doors, and her heartbeat quickened with an anticipation she had cultivated for 3 years. The first helicopter appeared on the horizon, a dark shape against the bright Texas sky. Then the second, then the third, then the fourth. 4 Blackhawks in diamond formation, their rotors beating the air with synchronized precision, their markings identifying them as belonging to a unit that did not officially exist. They banked over the airfield in perfect coordination, then began their descent toward the tarmac adjacent to Hangar 7. Colonel James's unit had arrived. The helicopters touched down in sequence, their engines winding down from screams to whispers. Ground crews rushed to position wheel chocks and secure landing gear, their movements practiced and efficient. The lead aircraft's door slid open, and a figure stepped onto the Texas concrete. Colonel James was 54 years old, with silver hair cropped close to his skull and eyes that had seen enough combat to make most war movies look like children's games. His uniform bore minimal decoration, a choice that spoke louder than any ribbon or medal could. Men who needed to advertise their accomplishments had not accomplished enough. Men like James had nothing to prove to anyone. He scanned the hangar with the methodical assessment of someone who instinctively noted exits, threats, and opportunities in every new environment. His gaze passed over Amber's welcoming committee, over Colonel Bradley's eager handshake, over the lined-up aircraft and the nervous technicians who maintained them. His gaze paused, for a fraction of a second, on the small woman standing in the shadows near the supply shelves. Then it moved on, and the pause might have been imagination. "Colonel Bradley?" James's voice carried effortlessly across the tarmac. "Thank you for the welcome. I understand you've been preparing for our arrival." "Of course, sir." Bradley's smile contained too many teeth. "Fort Braxton is honored to support your mission. Whatever you need, we're here to provide." "What I need is your lead engineer." James's tone carried no particular emphasis, but the words landed like stones dropped into still water. "I was told someone qualified would be available for consultation on a technical matter." Bradley's smile flickered. "Our senior technician, Derek Lawson, has over 15 years of—" "Not a senior technician," James interrupted with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "A lead engineer, specifically someone with classified clearance for advanced helicopter systems. Codename, Phantom Wrench." The silence that followed seemed to have physical weight. It pressed down on everyone present, demanding explanation that no one could provide. Derek stepped forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and professional pride. "Sir, I'm not familiar with that codename, but I can assure you, whatever technical expertise you require, the codename exists." James's eyes swept the hangar again. "And so does the person associated with it. I was given very specific information about this facility." Amber's smile had vanished entirely. She clutched her tablet like a shield, scrolling through personnel files that contained no mention of Phantom Wrench, because Phantom Wrench did not appear in files that people like Amber had access to read. "Colonel, there may have been some miscommunication." Colonel Bradley's diplomatic training kicked in. "Perhaps if you could clarify what specific technical assistance you require, we can identify the appropriate—" A new voice crackled over James's radio, cutting through the diplomatic maneuvering with urgent static. "Nighthawk 4 to Nighthawk Actual, we have a problem." James raised the radio to his ear, his expression shifting from curious to alert. "Go ahead, 4. Hydraulic warning light just came on. Tail rotor control is sluggish, requesting immediate maintenance assessment. Copy, 4. Keep her airborne until we verify ground support readiness." James lowered the radio and fixed Bradley with a stare that left no room for political navigation. "One of my birds is having hydraulic issues. The same issues I was told your lead engineer could address. Now, either that engineer exists and you produce them immediately, or we have a helicopter in the air with a potentially critical system failure and no one qualified to fix it." The threat was not stated directly, but it hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Derek stepped forward again. "Sir, I can—" "You can what?" James turned his full attention to the senior technician, and Derek visibly diminished under the scrutiny. "Can you fix a hydraulic failure on a modified aircraft with systems that don't appear in standard maintenance manuals? Can you interpret diagnostic codes that were designed specifically to be uninterpretable by anyone without classified clearance? Can you do any of that in the next 10 minutes before my pilot has to make emergency decisions about whether to attempt a landing or ditch?" Derek's mouth opened and closed without producing words. The radio crackled again. "Nighthawk 4, control response is degrading. Request priority guidance." And then a voice spoke from the back of the hangar, quiet and unremarkable, carrying words that stopped every conversation and drew every eye. "Tell your pilot to switch to manual override and bypass panel Charlie 4. Hazel stepped out of the shadows. The polishing cloth was gone. Her posture had changed in ways that were subtle but unmistakable, the slouch of a contractor replaced by the bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. She walked toward Colonel James with steps that covered ground efficiently, each footfall placed with deliberate purpose. Derek moved to intercept her. "What are you doing? Get back." The hydraulic warning is a false positive. Hazel did not slow down. The actual problem is in the tail rotor servo actuator. It's a known issue with the modifications your unit uses. The diagnostic system flags it as hydraulic because that's what it's programmed to recognize. But the fix is electrical, not mechanical. She reached James and stopped, meeting his eyes with an expression that contained no deference, no apology, no acknowledgement of the chaos her words were creating around her. If your pilot switches to manual override and routes control signals through the backup pathways in panel Charlie 4, the servo actuator will stabilize. It's not a permanent fix, but it will give you enough authority to land safely. James studied her face for a long moment. His radio was still in his hand, his pilot's voice asking for guidance, his entire unit watching to see how their commander would respond to a grease-stained woman who had just contradicted every technical expert in the facility. "Who are you?" "Someone who's seen this problem before." Hazel's voice remained level. "In Bagram, 3 years ago, during a night operation that officially never happened, something flickered in James's eyes, recognition, memory. The kind of knowledge that could not be faked, because it came from shared experience that existed nowhere in any official record. He raised his radio. "Nighthawk 4, this is actual. Switch to manual override. Bypass panel Charlie 4 and route control through backup pathways. Confirm when complete." A pause. Static. Then, "Actual 4. Switching now. Override engage. Controls responding. Whatever you just told me to do, it's working. Tail rotor authority restored." A collective exhale swept through the hangar. James lowered his radio without taking his eyes off Hazel. "That procedure isn't in any manual." "No," Hazel agreed. "It isn't. The only people who know it are the engineers who designed the modification. And there were only 7 of them. All with the same code name." James's voice dropped. "Phantom Wrench." The words landed like a verdict, reshaping everyone's understanding of the woman who had spent 3 weeks being invisible. Derek's face had gone pale. Amber's tablet hung forgotten at her side. Mason stood frozen near Bird 2, his navigation problems suddenly seeming very small compared to the revelation unfolding at the hangar's center. "You're one of them." James was not asking a question. "I was one of them." Hazel's response carried weight that suggested entire stories left untold. 3 years ago, before everything changed. "Then you know why I'm here, why I asked for you specifically. I know why you think you're here." Hazel's gaze held steady. "Whether your reasons match my reasons remains to be seen." James nodded slowly, processing implications that the rest of the hangar could barely comprehend. "We need to talk, privately. After your bird lands safely." Hazel glanced toward the sky where Nighthawk 4 was beginning its approach. "Manual override is stable, but the actuator will need replacement before your next flight. I can walk your ground crew through the procedure, assuming your ground crew is willing to take instruction from..." She gestured at her stained coveralls. "This." A faint smile crossed James's face, the first sign of emotion he had displayed since stepping off his helicopter. "I think you'll find my ground crew is very good at following orders from people who know what they're talking about. Unlike some facilities." His gaze swept across Derek, Amber, and the assembled personnel of Fort Braxton with an assessment that left no doubt about his conclusions. "Get Bird 4 on the ground, then we talk. And someone..." He looked directly at Colonel Bradley. "Someone explained to me how a Phantom Wrench engineer ended up being treated as a janitor in my support facility." Bradley's face achieved a shade of red that suggested immediate cardiovascular concerns. Hazel turned toward the landing pad without waiting for permission, her movements carrying the authority of someone who had stopped pretending to be anything other than what she was. Behind her, the hangar erupted in whispers, but one person was not whispering. Lieutenant Floyd had retreated to the far corner of the hangar, his face a mask of careful neutrality that hid emotions too complicated to name. He pulled out his phone, opened an encrypted messaging app, and typed 4 words. "She's finally showing herself." He deleted the message after confirming it was sent, then pocketed his phone and rejoined the crowd, his expression giving away nothing. Whatever game Hazel was playing, Floyd had games of his own, and both of them were only beginning. The maintenance bay adjacent to the main hangar became a different space entirely when Hazel entered it. Nighthawk 4 had landed safely, its pilot emerging with the shaky relief of someone who had just had a very close conversation with mortality. Now the helicopter sat on its maintenance stand, panels open, systems exposed, while Colonel James's ground crew waited for instruction from a woman most of them had never met. Hazel moved through the technical space like she owned it, her hands finding tools before she consciously reached for them, her eyes reading diagnostic displays with the fluency of a native language. The grease on her coveralls no longer looked like incompetence. It looked like evidence of someone who had been doing this work for years, someone who understood that real expertise got dirty. The servo actuator mounts here. She pointed to a component nested deep within the tail assembly. Your standard units use a 45-degree offset for the control linkage. But these modifications, she traced the custom housing with her fingertip, these use a 72-degree offset to accommodate the enhanced response characteristics. Staff Sergeant Reynolds, James's senior maintenance tech, leaned in for a closer look. We were told the modification was plug and play, same maintenance procedures as stock. Whoever told you that was either lying or ignorant. Hazel's voice carried no judgment, only fact. The offset change means the actuator experiences different stress patterns during aggressive maneuvering. Standard maintenance intervals don't account for the accelerated wear. You need to inspect these components at half the recommended cycle, or you'll keep getting false hydraulic warnings until the day the warning isn't false anymore. Reynolds exchanged glances with his team. The implications were clear. Someone had given them incomplete information about their own aircraft, and that incomplete information had almost killed their pilot. Can you show us the inspection procedure? I can do better than that. Hazel reached into the helicopter and began disconnecting components with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this exact task hundreds of times. I'll document the full maintenance protocol before you leave. Consider it professional courtesy. She continued working, her hands moving faster than most eyes could track, each action precise and purposeful. The ground crew watched in silence, occasionally handing her tools when she extended her hand without looking. Colonel James observed from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Besides him, Ivy had positioned herself with a clear view of both the maintenance work and the reactions of Fort Braxton's personnel. She's good. Ivy kept her voice low enough that only James could hear. Better than good. She's been doing this all day, hiding what she could do, letting everyone assume she was nothing. 3 weeks. James's response was equally quiet. She's been here 3 weeks. That's not coincidence. No, sir, it's not. The question is what she's looking for. James's eyes tracked Hazel's movements, and whether finding it will help us or complicate things. Ivy considered the question. Want me to dig into her background? Her official background is fiction. I've read the file they gave Bradley. Temporary contractor, no military experience, basic mechanical certification. It's a cover story, and not a very sophisticated one. James paused. The sophisticated part is how she made everyone believe it. She had help. The way Derek and his crew treated her, the way Floyd kept finding excuses to put her in uncomfortable positions, someone was feeding that hostility, making sure she stayed beneath notice. Floyd. James's tone sharpened. Tell me about Floyd. Lieutenant Benjamin Floyd. Transferred here 18 months ago from administrative duty in Germany. His personnel file is clean, maybe too clean. No disciplinary issues, no commendations, no notable achievements. He's the kind of officer who doesn't stand out in any direction, which is exactly the kind of officer who would be useful for certain purposes. James watched as Hazel completed her work on the servo actuator and began reassembling the components. Keep an eye on him, quietly. Already on it, sir. Hazel finished her work and stepped back from the helicopter. Her hands were black with hydraulic fluid, her coveralls even more stained than before, but her expression carried the satisfaction of a job done correctly. She'll fly. Hazel wiped her hands on a rag that was already too dirty to be effective. The actuator is within tolerance for another 50 hours, but I'd recommend replacement at your next scheduled maintenance window. Reynolds stepped forward and offered his hand. Thank you. That's impressive work. Hazel shook his hand briefly. It's my job, was my job. Depends on perspective. If you don't mind my asking, Reynolds hesitated. What happened? Why would someone with your skills end up working as a temp contractor at a place like this? That's a long story. Hazel's gaze drifted past Reynolds toward the main hangar, where Floyd was pretending to supervise equipment that did not need supervision. and I'm not sure I'm ready to tell it yet." She walked away from the helicopter, leaving Reynolds and his crew to complete the final assembly. James intercepted her at the maintenance bay door. "We need that conversation now." "I know." Hazel did not slow down. "But not here. Too many ears, too many phones, too many people who might talk to people they shouldn't." "Then where?" "There's an observation platform on the far side of the airfield. Line of sight in all directions. No electronic monitoring. Difficult to approach without being seen." Hazel finally met his eyes. "Meet me there in 15 minutes. And, Colonel, come alone." She walked away before he could respond, her small figure disappearing into the brightness of the afternoon sun. James watched her go, then turned to find Ivy at his elbow. "Sir, secure the aircraft. Full diagnostic on all 4 birds before we fly again." James's voice carried the decisiveness of command. "And find out everything you can about what happened in this hangar over the past 3 weeks. Every interaction, every assignment, every insult. I want to know who was testing our engineer and why. And if I find something that implicates someone here, then we'll have another conversation." James headed toward the observation platform, his stride carrying the purpose of a man who was finally about to get answers to questions he had carried for 3 years. A less pleasant one. The observation platform stood on a slight rise at the eastern edge of the airfield, a remnant of the base's earlier incarnation, when aircraft spotters still served a purpose that radar and satellites had long since made obsolete. Now it was used primarily by personnel seeking a place to smoke away from official scrutiny, its weathered benches and sun-bleached railing offering a view of the entire facility without being part of it. Hazel was already there when James arrived, her silhouette outlined against the Texas sky. She had removed her coveralls and stood in a plain tank top and work pants, her arms crossed, her attention fixed on the hangars below. James stopped several feet away, respecting the space she had established, waiting for her to initiate whatever conversation was about to happen. "Bagram." Hazel spoke without turning around. "August 12, 2021. Your unit was conducting an extraction operation in Sector 7. 3 helicopters, 12 personnel, 1 high-value target. I remember. What you don't remember, because you never knew, is that your extraction almost didn't happen." Hazel turned to face him. "Your primary aircraft had a flight control malfunction during the approach phase, minor enough that your pilot didn't report it, major enough that your landing would have been compromised if the enemy had engaged you during touchdown." James's expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. "We took fire during the extraction. 2 rockets, both near misses." "They weren't near misses. They were aimed correctly. Your pilot's control inputs were corrupted by the malfunction, making your aircraft move unpredictably. That unpredictability is the only reason those rockets didn't connect." Hazel paused. "The malfunction was not an accident." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone sabotaged your aircraft before that mission. Someone with access to maintenance systems, someone who knew your flight path, someone who wanted that extraction to fail." Hazel's voice hardened. "I found the evidence that night, after you were safely back at base. I traced the sabotage to a source, but before I could report it, my sister was sent on a mission to Kandahar, a mission that should have been routine, a mission from which she never returned." James processed the information, his tactical mind mapping connections that suddenly seemed obvious. "Your sister was Phantom Wrench. My sister was Wraith 3, I'm Wraith 7. There were 5 of us at our peak, engineers who maintained aircraft for operations that officially never happened, who fixed problems that officially never existed, who kept people alive in situations where everyone was supposed to die." Hazel's jaw tightened. "Rachel was the best of us. She was also the one who taught me everything I know, and 3 years ago, someone gave away her position to people who wanted her dead." "You've been investigating." "I've been hunting." The word carried weight that investigation did not. "For 3 years, I've followed threads that kept leading nowhere. Dead ends, falsified records, witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen. Whoever betrayed Rachel had resources, protection, the ability to make evidence disappear." Hazel gestured toward the hangars below. "But they made one mistake. They assumed I would stay dead too." James frowned. "You were reported killed in action. Kandahar, same operation as your sister. The report was convenient for everyone. It allowed me to disappear, to operate without official oversight, to become invisible in a way that even Phantom Wrench's secrecy couldn't have provided." Hazel's smile contained no warmth. Being dead has advantages. So, you came here, to Fort Braxton. Why? Because the threads finally converged. Hazel pointed toward the main hangar. Someone at this facility has connections to what happened 3 years ago. I don't know who yet, but the patterns are here. Transfer requests that don't make sense. Maintenance logs with gaps that shouldn't exist. Personnel who react too strongly when certain topics arise. Floyd, James said the name like a conclusion. He's one possibility, but he might just be nervous because he's incompetent in hiding it. I need more time to be certain. Hazel turned back toward the view. Which brings us to why you're really here, Colonel. Because your visit wasn't scheduled until next month. Something accelerated your timeline. Something made you come looking for Phantom Wrench specifically. James was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of information he had clearly debated sharing. 6 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that the same network responsible for the Kandahar incident is still active, still operating, and still targeting operations connected to units like mine. Hazel's stillness became absolute. What kind of communications? Encrypted messages referencing future actions, dates, locations, operational details that haven't been made public yet. The kind of information that only comes from inside our command structure. James met her eyes. Whoever betrayed your sister didn't stop. They just got more careful. And if we don't find them soon, more people are going to die. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with consequence and possibility. You came here for me. Hazel's voice was flat. Not because you needed technical support, because you knew I would be here. You knew I was still alive. We suspected. The operation that supposedly killed you had too many loose ends, too many details that didn't quite fit. When I was given this mission, I was told to look for someone who might be operating under deep cover within our own support network. James paused. I was told to look for a ghost. And if you found one? Then I was authorized to offer that ghost a choice. James reached into his uniform pocket and produced a small object, a challenge coin worn smooth by years of handling. He placed it on the railing between them. Rejoin the operation. Help us find the leak. End this, once and for all. Hazel looked at the coin without touching it. The symbol on its face was familiar, a wrench wrapped in shadow, the emblem of a unit that officially did not exist. What's the alternative? There isn't one. James's honesty was brutal. You're too exposed now. Too many people have seen what you can do. The cover you've been building for 3 weeks is compromised. If you try to go back to being invisible, the people you're hunting will know. They'll disappear again, or worse, they'll come for you directly. Hazel picked up the coin. Its weight was negligible, its significance immense. I have conditions. Name them. First, I work my way. No oversight, no check-ins, no reports to people I haven't vetted personally. The leak could be anywhere in your chain of command, and I'm not going to expose myself to someone who might be the enemy. Agreed. Second, when I find who betrayed my sister, I get first conversation. Not arrest, not detainment. Conversation. I need to know why. James hesitated. Within limits. Within whatever limits I decide are appropriate at the time. Hazel's tone left no room for negotiation. You want my help, you accept that some questions matter more than procedure. A long pause. Then, agreed, conditionally. Third, Hazel closed her hand around the coin. There's something in that hangar I haven't finished finding yet. Something in the restricted files that Floyd didn't want me to see. I need 48 hours before we leave this facility. The communications we intercepted suggested action within the next 72 hours. That gives you minimal margin. Then I'll work fast. Hazel pocketed the coin and turned toward the path leading back to the base. But I'm not leaving Fort Braxton until I know whether the answers I need are here or somewhere else. James watched her go, the same way he had watched her disappear into the sun earlier. This time, though, he was not wondering who she was. He was wondering what she would become when she finally found what she was looking for, and whether anyone would be able to stop her. The walk back to Hangar 7 took less than 10 minutes, but Hazel used every second of it to recalibrate her plans. The conversation with Colonel James had changed the equation in ways she was still calculating. Her cover was compromised, yes, but compromise could be leveraged. The people who had been watching her, dismissing her, underestimating her, they would now be forced to reveal themselves through their reactions. Predators became most visible when their prey suddenly stopped running. She entered the hangar through the side door. the one that maintenance personnel used when they wanted to avoid the main workspace. The interior had transformed during her absence. Word of her intervention with Nighthawk 4 had spread through the facility like fire through dry grass, and now every eye that found her carried a different quality than before. Derek stood near Bird 2, his arms crossed, his expression a complex mixture of anger and something that might have been fear if he had been capable of admitting such emotions. Mason worked beside him, unusually quiet, his hands moving through diagnostic procedures with none of his typical commentary. Amber had retreated to the administrative office, visible through the window, her phone pressed to her ear in what appeared to be an urgent conversation. Floyd was nowhere to be seen. That absence concerned Hazel more than any presence could have. She moved toward the parts room, the same restricted area where Floyd had found her earlier. The files she needed were still there, waiting for examination that had been interrupted. If she was going to find her answers within James's 48-hour window, she needed to work faster than caution normally allowed. The parts room door was locked. Hazel examined the lock, a standard military-grade mechanism that would have stopped most unauthorized personnel. She pulled a small tool from her pocket, something that looked like a pen but served an entirely different purpose, and had the door open in 7 seconds. The restricted section was exactly as she had left it, red tags marking shelves that contained information above her official clearance level. But official clearance no longer mattered. She was done pretending to be someone who followed rules designed to keep her ignorant. Her fingers moved through folders with renewed urgency, pulling documents, scanning contents, building the picture that had been fragmenting across 3 years of investigation. Transfer requests, maintenance logs, personnel evaluations, communication records. And then she found it. A single page, misfiled among routine requisition forms, bearing a date that made her hands go still. August 9th, 2021, 3 days before Bagram. 3 days before the operation that almost killed Colonel James's unit. 3 days before the sabotage that started everything. The document was a maintenance authorization, approving modifications to a helicopter that should not have required modifications. The signature at the bottom was illegible, deliberately so, but the authorization code was not. Hazel memorized the code, then photographed the document with a device concealed in her belt buckle. The camera looked like a standard buckle component to anyone who did not know what they were examining. She had built it herself 3 years ago, when she first understood that her investigation would require tools that did not officially exist. Footsteps in the corridor outside. She replaced the document, closed the folder, and moved toward the door with the silent efficiency that combat training had made instinctive. The door opened before she reached it. Lieutenant Floyd stood in the doorway, his expression carrying none of the nervous energy she had observed before. His eyes moved to the restricted shelves, then to Hazel, then back to the shelves, calculating what she might have seen and what that seeing might cost him. "You're not supposed to be in here. Neither are you." Hazel kept her voice level. "Your clearance was revoked 6 months ago. Administrative error, according to the records. But errors don't usually happen to people who haven't done anything wrong." Floyd's face went through several transformations in rapid succession. Surprise, fear, anger, and finally a kind of resigned calculation that suggested he had been expecting this moment longer than Hazel had been planning it. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know that someone at this facility has been feeding information to people who use it to kill American service members. I know that someone authorized modifications to aircraft that were designed to fail at critical moments. I know that 3 years ago, my sister died because someone gave away her position to enemies who shouldn't have known she existed." Hazel stepped closer, her small stature suddenly irrelevant against the weight of her words. "What I don't know yet is whether you're the source or just someone who's been helping the source stay hidden." Floyd's hand moved toward his sidearm. Hazel's hand was faster. She had his wrist locked and twisted before his fingers touched the holster, applying pressure to nerve points that sent pain shooting up his arm without causing visible injury. Floyd gasped and went to his knees, his weapon clattering to the floor. "That was a mistake." Hazel maintained her grip, her voice conversational despite the violence of the moment. "Now I know you're involved. An innocent man would have called for security. A guilty man reaches for his gun. You don't understand." Floyd's voice came through gritted teeth. "I didn't have a choice. They have my family, my daughter. If I don't do what they say, then help me stop them." Hazel released his wrist and stepped back. "Tell me who gives you orders. Tell me how the network operates." Give me something I can use and I'll make sure your family is protected. Floyd looked up at her, his expression torn between hope and terror. You can't protect them. Nobody can. These people, they're everywhere. Military, civilian, government. They've been operating for years, maybe decades. I'm just one small piece. Then give me another piece. Give me a name, a location, anything that moves me closer to the center. Floyd opened his mouth to respond. The hangar's emergency alarm drowned out whatever he was about to say. Red lights began flashing throughout the facility, accompanied by a piercing tone that indicated immediate threat. Hazel moved to the parts room door and looked out into the main hangar, where chaos had erupted with the sudden intensity of a bomb detonation. Personnel ran in multiple directions, some toward emergency stations, others toward the aircraft, still others toward exits that promised escape from whatever danger the alarm announced. Voices overlapped in competing urgencies, creating a wall of sound that made individual words impossible to distinguish. Colonel James's voice cut through the noise, amplified by a handheld megaphone. All personnel, emergency stations. Nighthawk 4 reports hostile contact inbound. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Hazel turned back to Floyd, but the parts room was empty. He had used the alarm's distraction to disappear through a secondary door she had not noticed, leaving behind only his fallen weapon and the conversation that had been interrupted before it could produce answers. She grabbed the weapon, checked its load, and moved into the hangar. The next several minutes blurred with the controlled chaos of a military facility responding to threat. Hazel found herself swept into the emergency response, her skills automatically engaging despite her unofficial status. She helped secure equipment, directed confused personnel toward appropriate shelter points, and maintained the kind of calm efficiency that marked veterans of actual combat. Ivy found her near the main doors, where Hazel was scanning the sky for the hostile contact that James had announced. It's not real. Ivy's voice was low enough that only Hazel could hear. The alert is fake. Someone triggered it manually from the secondary control room. Floyd. Most likely. He's not at his station, and no one's seen him since the alarm started. Ivy's expression hardened, but here's the interesting part. About 30 seconds before the alarm, someone initiated an encrypted data transfer from the base's secure communications array. Someone with high-level access codes. What kind of data? Personnel files, maintenance records, operational schedules. Ivy paused. And everything related to Colonel James's visit. Hazel's mind raced through implications. Floyd was running, which meant he knew his cover was blown. But running was not the same as escaping. He needed to transmit whatever information he had gathered, which meant he needed access to communication equipment, which meant he was still somewhere on the base. Where's the secondary control room? East wing, 3rd floor, but security is already heading there. Security won't know what they're looking for. Hazel started moving. I do. She ran. The east wing was an older section of the base, its corridors narrower and less updated than the modern facilities surrounding Hangar 7. Hazel navigated by memory and instinct, taking shortcuts through maintenance passages that most personnel did not know existed. She reached the secondary control room's corridor, just as Floyd emerged from the doorway, a data drive clutched in his hand, his expression carrying the desperate determination of a man who had run out of options. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. For a single heartbeat, neither moved. Then Floyd turned and sprinted toward the emergency exit at the corridor's far end. Hazel pursued. She was faster than him, but he had a head start and the advantage of adrenaline-fueled desperation. The gap between them narrowed with each step, but not fast enough to catch him before he reached the exit door. Floyd slammed through the door and onto an exterior stairwell that led down to the ground level. Hazel followed, her feet hammering metal steps, her breath controlled, despite the exertion. He hit the ground running, cutting across an open area between buildings toward the perimeter fence. He was not going to make it. Colonel James appeared from behind a supply building, directly in Floyd's path. The colonel's stance was relaxed, his hands empty, but his positioning left no route for escape. Floyd skidded to a halt, trapped between James ahead and Hazel behind. Lieutenant, James's voice carried the disappointment of a commander confronting betrayal. I think we need to have a conversation. Floyd's hand went to his holster before remembering that his weapon was somewhere on the floor of the parts room, his fingers closed on empty air. You don't understand. The words tumbled out with frantic speed. I had to do it. They would have killed my family. They showed me photographs, recordings, proof that they could reach anyone I cared about. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to report the threat. James stepped closer. You were supposed to trust your chain of command. You were supposed to be the officer you swore to be. Trust? Floyd laughed, a broken sound that contained no humor. Trust got Rachel killed. Trust got half of Phantom Wrench eliminated. The people I report to might be the same people who are giving me orders. How am I supposed to know who's safe? The name hit Hazel like a physical blow. You knew my sister. Floyd turned to face her, his expression shifting to something that might have been genuine remorse. Everyone knew Rachel. She was the best engineer in the program, the one they sent when missions absolutely could not fail. And she trusted the wrong person. She shared information with someone she thought was an ally, and that someone fed her location to enemies who were waiting for exactly that opportunity. Who? Hazel's voice was barely controlled. Who did she trust? I don't know names. I only know codes, dead drops, encrypted channels that lead nowhere I can trace. Floyd's shoulders sagged. But I know one thing. The person who betrayed her wasn't some foreign agent or enemy operative. It was someone inside our own command structure. Someone high enough to access classified operation details. Someone who's still there, still operating, still deciding who lives and who dies. Colonel James exchanged glances with Hazel. The implications aligned with the intelligence that had brought him to Fort Braxton in the first place. The data drive. James extended his hand. Give it to me. Floyd hesitated, then placed the drive in James's palm. It's everything I was supposed to transmit. Personnel files, operational schedules, communication logs. They wanted to know who came with you, what your mission parameters were, how long you planned to stay. Who's they? I told you. I don't know. The contacts are anonymous, the communications are encrypted, the payments appear in offshore accounts that can't be traced. Floyd's voice cracked. I'm just a conduit, a tool. They use me and throw me away, just like they used Rachel. Hazel stepped forward until she was close enough to see the fear in Floyd's eyes. My sister wasn't a tool. She was a person. A brilliant engineer, a devoted officer, a woman who believed that service meant something. And someone took all of that away because it was convenient. I know. Floyd could not meet her gaze. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. It's not worth much. Hazel turned away. But it's something. Security personnel arrived moments later, surrounding Floyd with the efficient precision of a procedure they had practiced but hoped never to execute. He went quietly, offering no resistance, his brief moment of flight having exhausted whatever fight remained in him. James watched the arrest with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. When Floyd was secured in the back of a military police vehicle, the colonel turned to Hazel. That could have gone worse. It could have gone better. Hazel stared at the vehicle as it drove away. He's not the source. He's barely even a symptom. The real infection is still out there, still spreading, still killing people. But now we have a thread to pull. James held up the data drive. Whatever's on this might lead us closer to the center. Or it might be exactly what they wanted us to find. Hazel's paranoia was earned through experience. Convenient confessions rarely contain complete truths. Then we verify, we cross-reference. We build a case that doesn't depend on a single source. James pocketed the drive. That's why I need you, Hazel. Not just your technical skills, your instincts. Your willingness to question everything, including the answers that seem too easy. Hazel was silent for a long moment. The Texas sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed inappropriate for the weight of the day's revelations. There's something I need to do first. She started walking back toward Hangar 7. Something I should have done 3 weeks ago. What's that? Introduce myself properly. The hangar had returned to a state of tense calm when Hazel entered through the main doors. The false alarm had been canceled. The emergency protocols stood down. But the atmosphere retained the charged quality of air before a thunderstorm. Personnel moved through their duties with distracted efficiency, their attention split between tasks and whispered conversations about what had just happened. Derek saw her first. His expression cycled through anger, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into aggressive defensiveness. You. He strode toward her with the confidence of someone who still believed his authority meant something. You're the one who caused all this, the alarm, the security response, the chaos. It all started when you decided to play hero with Colonel James's helicopter. Hazel stopped walking and faced him. Around them, conversations faded as people turned to watch the confrontation. "I didn't cause the alarm, Derek. Lieutenant Floyd did. And the reason he ran is because he's been selling information to people who want American service members dead." Her voice carried clearly across the hangar. "But you're right about one thing. This did start with me." Derek's sneer faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about 3 weeks of watching you treat people like they're beneath you. 3 weeks of listening to you demonstrate exactly how little you understand about the equipment you're supposed to maintain. 3 weeks of being invisible while you and your friends made decisions that could have gotten people killed." She stepped closer, and Derek involuntarily stepped back. "The hydraulic coupling on Bird 3, the one that was installed backward, that happened because your maintenance procedures prioritize speed over accuracy. The navigation errors on Bird 2, those exist because Mason was too proud to ask for help and too arrogant to accept it when it was offered. The servo actuator failure on Nighthawk 4, that's a known issue with the modifications, documented in technical bulletins that someone in this hangar should have read." Her voice rose, not to a shout, but to a carrying clarity that reached every corner of the facility. "You want to know who I am, Derek? I'm the person who's been fixing your mistakes in the shadows because someone had to. I'm the person who noticed the problems you were too busy to see. I'm the person who saved lives today while you were worried about whether I would embarrass you in front of visitors." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the machinery seemed to hold its breath. Colonel James chose that moment to enter the hangar, his timing either coincidental or deliberately theatrical. He walked directly toward Hazel, his pace measured, his bearing carrying the weight of command authority. "Personnel of Fort Braxton." His voice filled the space without apparent effort. "My name is Colonel James Harrison. I command the unit that visited your facility today, and I'm here to tell you that everything you think you know about this woman is wrong." He stopped beside Hazel, turning to face the assembled crowd. "This is Hazel, codename Wraith 7, former lead engineer of Phantom Wrench, a classified unit that provides technical support for operations that officially do not exist. 3 years ago, she was reported killed in action during a mission in Kandahar. That report was a cover story designed to allow her to continue investigating a security breach that had cost the life of her sister and threatened the lives of countless others." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Faces registered shock, disbelief, and in some cases the dawning recognition of people who were beginning to understand how completely they had misjudged the woman standing before them. For the past 3 weeks, she has been operating undercover at this facility, gathering intelligence on potential security compromises. During that time, she has been insulted, dismissed, and treated with a level of disrespect that would be inappropriate for any human being, let alone a decorated veteran with more combat experience than most of you will ever see. James's gaze swept across Derek, Amber, Mason, and Silas in turn. "That ends now." The words landed like a gavel. Derek's face had gone from red to white. Amber clutched her tablet like a lifeline. Mason looked like he was trying to become invisible. Silas stood at rigid attention, his military bearing unable to conceal his mortification. "Hazel," James turned to face her, "on behalf of everyone who has ever benefited from your service, I want to say something that should have been said 3 years ago." He came to attention. His hand rose in a formal salute, the gesture crisp and perfect, carrying the weight of decades of military tradition. "Thank you." For a long moment, Hazel did not move. Then, slowly, she returned the salute. Around the hangar, other hands began to rise. Francis was first, the old Master Sergeant's salute carrying 40 years of understanding about what real service looked like. Ivy followed, then Theo, then Reynolds and his crew from James's unit. One by one, the personnel of Hangar 7 joined the tribute, until even Derek's hand moved reluctantly to his forehead. The moment stretched, suspended in a silence that contained more respect than words could express. Then Hazel dropped her salute, and the spell broke. "We have work to do." Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes suggested that the gesture had affected her more deeply than she would ever admit. "The threat isn't over. Floyd was just one link in a chain that reaches much higher than this facility. If we're going to find the people responsible, we need to move fast and work together." She looked at Derek, and her expression contained neither triumph nor resentment. "That means all of us. We're almost at the end, but real quick, if you're loving this story, you're gonna love what's coming. I drop new military drama videos every single week, and trust me, next week's story, even crazier than this one. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss it. Also, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Now, let's finish this. The next 48 hours transformed Fort Braxton in ways that would be discussed for years afterward. Colonel Bradley received a formal reprimand for failure to properly vet temporary personnel, his political career suddenly less certain than it had been before James's visit. Derek was reassigned to administrative duties pending a comprehensive review of his supervisory practices. Amber found her transfer request to a more prestigious posting indefinitely postponed. Mason began attending remedial training sessions on collaborative problem solving. Sergeant Silas approached Hazel on the second evening, his posture carrying none of the aggressive authority he had displayed before. "Ma'am?" He struggled with the word, which had never before been directed at someone he had treated as inferior. "I owe you an apology. What I said about women, about your qualifications, about your place in this facility, I was wrong, completely wrong." Hazel regarded him with an expression that gave away nothing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it needs to be said. Because I spent 30 years building walls between myself and anyone who didn't fit my idea of what a soldier should look like. And those walls almost got people killed." Silas swallowed hard. "My grandson wants to join the military. He's 17, full of dreams about serving his country. I've been telling him stories about my career, making it sound like the only way to serve is to be big, loud, and aggressive. But that's not true, is it? The most valuable people are often the ones nobody notices. Your grandson is lucky to have someone who can admit when they're wrong." Hazel allowed a hint of warmth into her voice. "That's a rare quality. It's a quality I learned today." Silas straightened his spine. "If there's anything I can do to help with your investigation, anything at all, you just have to ask. I might take you up on that." She watched him walk away, his bearing somehow different than before, like a man who had set down a weight he had not realized he was carrying. Frances found her later that evening, near the observation platform where she had first spoken with Colonel James. The old master sergeant carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one without comment. "You remind me of someone." Frances sipped his coffee and stared at the darkening sky. "A woman I knew in Desert Storm, quiet, competent, constantly underestimated. She saved my team twice during that deployment, and both times she acted like it was nothing special. What happened to her? She became a general. Last I heard, she was running logistics for half the Pacific Command." Frances smiled. "Point is, people like you tend to end up in places where people like me can only watch and admire. I'm not looking for advancement, Frances. I'm looking for answers." "I know." He reached into his pocket and produced a worn challenge coin, the same symbol that marked Hazel's shoulder. "Wraith 3 gave me this in 2019. She said I'd know when to pass it on." Hazel took the coin, turning it over in her fingers. The metal was warm from Frances's pocket, worn smooth by years of handling. "You knew Rachel." "I knew her well enough to see what losing her did to the program." Frances's voice softened. "And I knew her well enough to recognize her sister the moment you walked into this hangar. You have the same eyes, the same way of watching everything without seeming to watch anything. Why didn't you say something?" "Because you didn't want anyone to say something. You wanted to work in the shadows, gather your information, find your answers without interference. That's how Rachel would have done it." Frances finished his coffee and crushed the cup. "But now the shadows are over. Now you're visible. The question is, what are you going to do with that visibility?" Hazel looked at the coin in her hand, then at the facility spread out below them, then at the stars beginning to appear in the Texas sky. "I'm going to finish what Rachel started." The answer came on the 3rd day. Colonel James's technical team had spent 48 hours analyzing the data drive recovered from Floyd, cross-referencing its contents with intelligence from multiple sources. The picture that emerged was incomplete but damning, a network of compromised personnel spanning multiple facilities, multiple commands, multiple years of operation. The authorization code that Hazel had found in the restricted files matched a pattern identified in the data. Someone had been using that code to approve modifications, transfers, and communications that bypassed normal security protocols. Someone with access that should have been impossible. The trail led to a name. James delivered the news in the secure briefing room that had been established for their investigation. His face carried the grim satisfaction of a hunter who had finally sighted his prey. General Marcus Webb. The name hung in the air. Hazel's mind immediately connected it to another Webb, the arrogant avionics specialist who had spent 3 weeks making her feel small. Mason's father? Uncle, actually. Mason was placed here as a secondary observation point. He probably doesn't know the full scope of what his uncle is involved in, but his presence allowed General Webb to receive informal updates about facility operations, personnel movements, and security procedures. Does Mason know about the arrest? There won't be an arrest, not yet. James's expression hardened. General Webb has enough connections to make a direct approach dangerous. If we move too quickly, he'll have time to destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, and disappear into the protection of people who owe him favors. We need to build an airtight case before we act. How long? Weeks, maybe months. The kind of network we're dealing with doesn't collapse overnight. Hazel absorbed this information, her tactical mind already mapping the extended operation that lay ahead. Weeks of careful investigation, months of patient evidence gathering, the same slow, methodical work that had consumed the past 3 years of her life. She was prepared to continue. She had no other choice. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. The number was blocked, the caller ID showing only a string of zeros. Under normal circumstances, she would have ignored it. But something about the timing, about the context, about the instinct that had kept her alive through situations that should have killed her, made her answer. Wraith 7. The voice was male, distorted by electronic masking. Congratulations on your investigation. You've made excellent progress. Hazel's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who's been watching you for a very long time. Someone who knows things about Kandahar that even Colonel James hasn't discovered yet. What things? A pause. Static crackled through the connection. Your sister is alive. The words detonated in Hazel's mind like a bomb with a delayed fuse. For a moment, she could not breathe, could not think, could not process the impossible statement that had just been delivered. That's not possible. I saw the reports. I read the after-action analysis. Rachel was captured, extracted to a facility that doesn't appear on any map. She's been held there for 3 years, providing technical expertise under duress to the same network you've been hunting. Why should I believe you? Because I'm going to send you proof. The voice remained flat, emotionless. A file containing information that only Rachel would know. Details about your childhood, your training, your first operation together. Things that no intelligence agency could fabricate because they were never recorded anywhere. Hazel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. A file attachment. The name, Kandahar_truth.encrypted. Who are you? Her voice came out as a whisper. Someone who wants the same thing you want. An end to this network. Justice for the people they have killed. Freedom for the people they're still holding. Another pause. Your next mission is no longer finding who betrayed your sister. Your next mission is finding your sister herself. Where is she? Tell me where she is. All in good time, Wraith 7. The file will give you a starting point. The rest, you'll have to discover on your own. The line went dead. Hazel stared at her phone, at the encrypted file that waited to be opened, at the impossible hope that had just been delivered by a voice she did not recognize. Colonel James was watching her with concern. Hazel, what is it? She looked up, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, her expression showed genuine emotion. Not the controlled competence that had carried her through 3 years of investigation, not the patient determination that had sustained her through 3 weeks of humiliation. Something rawer, something human. The mission just changed, Colonel. Changed how? Hazel pocketed her phone, her mind already racing through new calculations, new possibilities, new dangers that dwarfed everything they had faced so far. We're not just looking for a traitor anymore. She moved toward the door, toward the helicopter that would carry her to whatever came next, toward a future that had suddenly become more uncertain and more hopeful than she had ever imagined possible. Colonel James followed, his questions hanging in the air behind her. Then what are we looking for? Hazel paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the Texas sunset, her small frame carrying the weight of revelations that would reshape everything. We're looking for a ghost. Her voice carried across the room with quiet intensity. We're looking for someone who was supposed to be dead. She stepped through the door and into the fading light. Behind her, the personnel of Fort Braxton watched her go, their understanding of the world permanently altered by the woman they had dismissed as a scruffy mechanic. And somewhere, in a facility that did not exist on any map, a woman named Rachel waited for a rescue she did not know was coming. The hunt was only beginning. Every day we walk past people whose stories we will never know, the quiet coworker who never speaks up in meetings, the janitor who cleans our offices after hours, the woman in worn clothes who sits alone at the corner table. We see their surfaces and assume we understand their depths. Hazel spent 3 weeks being invisible. 3 weeks of insults, dismissals, and casual cruelty from people who measured her worth by her appearance. They saw grease-stained coveralls and assumed incompetence. They saw silence and assumed weakness. They saw a small woman and assumed she had nothing valuable to offer. They were catastrophically wrong. The truth is, real strength rarely announces itself. Real expertise does not need to prove anything to anyone. The most dangerous people in any room are often the ones nobody notices. And the most valuable contributions often come from those we have decided do not matter. This story is not just about a hidden military hero. It is about the assumptions we make every single day. The colleague we dismiss, the stranger we ignore, the person we decide is beneath our attention. What if we are wrong? What if the person we just insulted is carrying burdens we cannot imagine? What if they possess skills that could save our lives? Here is your challenge. This week, choose one person you have been overlooking. Learn their name. Ask about their story. Listen without judgment. You might discover that ghosts walk among us everywhere, and some of them are waiting for someone to finally see them. Subscribe for more stories that challenge how we see the world.